to Clarity on Fire, a podcast for people who know what they don't want out of their life and career, but aren't sure what they'd rather be doing.
In a world where it's easy to exist, but hard to feel alive, we, Kristen
and Rachel,
two certified life and career coaches, are here to help you cut through the information overload, get unstuck, and focus not just on how you can have a career you're passionate about, but how to create a whole life that feels fulfilling.
So join us here, where we serve up inspiration and down-to-earth wisdom in a way that only two best friends can.
We want you to experience the relief of knowing that, yes, you're allowed to want more out of your life and career.
And no, you don't have to wander through the dark anymore. Our job is to light the fire that shows you the way. Let's go. Hi.
Hey.
Well, this is that thing I intended to be on, and then for some reason I ended up not being able to be there. So this will be a surprise for me, this episode.
You're going to like this one. And I was the one who came to you and said, we need to talk to Sam Laura Brown. So,
well, right. So you did end up talking to Sam Laura Brown.
And I'm glad that I did get to talk to her because she was phenomenal. I had heard her on another podcast and I was like, I need you to just tell all of our people everything I just heard you say because it was that good. So she came on and brought all of her wisdom that I heard, but also her latest and greatest, because that interview I'd heard was a couple years old. And she's been working with people on perfectionism for years now. And so she's seen it all. She's seen it all. And one of the first things that I get into with her is there's a lot of people who think they're not perfectionists. And it's almost kind of meta because it's like they don't think they're perfect enough to be a perfectionist, which is the crux of perfectionism. So if you're like, I don't really know if this is going to apply to me, I'm like, just listen, because I have a feeling it will.
This is me. Like, big enough of an ego to be like, that doesn't apply to me. And then listen to it and be like, oh, well, that applies to me precisely.
Right. That's part of why I wanted to bring her on is because I felt called out when I first listened to her and I was like, ooh, yeah, there's some good stuff here. So she's fantastic. And I can't wait for you to hear her latest and greatest on perfectionism. Cause I walked away with some valuable little nuggets. So do you want to read her bio?
Yes, I will. Okay. Sam Laura Brown is a perfectionism coach, host of the top-rated podcast, The Perfectionism Project, and founder of Perfectionists Getting Shit Done, a group coaching program for perfectionists who are building businesses. Sam teaches perfectionists how to follow through with their plans and get out of their own way in business. So I'm sure much of your conversation relates to people, not just business owners.
Exactly.
Or we wouldn't have had her on.
She's shifted her business to be a little bit more focused on business owners in the past year or so. But over the years, she has worked with anyone and everyone who is a perfectionist. And so that's more of what we got into today.
Okay. Well, you can find her at samlaurabrown.com and you can follow her on Instagram at Perfectionism Project.
Okay. Well, definitely make sure that you go find more of her stuff after this. Cause I have a feeling this is going to be a really good intro and it's going to blow open some new ideas about yourself as you listen. So go check out Sam Laura Brown, especially if you're someone who is curious about starting your own business or maybe has your own business and you're relating to this. Definitely check her out. But really everybody I think will benefit from what she's got to say.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing this and then we will be back at the end.
Hi, Sam.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
I am really excited to have you on today. I will say, I heard you get interviewed on a podcast, and then I obviously went and listened to some of your podcast episodes. But the first thing I thought when I heard the way you talked about perfectionism, I was like, two things immediately, two reactions. I was like, I'm more of a perfectionist than I thought I was. And
I hear that a lot.
I was like, and I know our people need to hear this. Like our listeners are going to relate to this so hard, like almost uncomfortably, but in a good way. So instantly I was like, we need to have her on our podcast because if I had this big of a reaction, and I know our people, this is gonna sink in. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your perfectionism wisdom here, because I think we get it mixed up a lot. I think there's a lot of misconceptions. Maybe that's actually a good place to start, is what some of the misconceptions about perfectionists are. And I know you have some experience with your own misconceptions and how you got into this work. So wherever you want to kick off in that arena.
Yeah, sure. So I think when it comes to perfectionism, the way I talk about it is that we have a perfectionist handbrake, and it's not this big problem that we have to manage or overcome. And I think, like, we'll get into the misconceptions about it, but I think it's so important to start there, because when people are listening to this and they will resonate with it, and it's easy to then to go into shame about being a perfectionist, or that that's a big problem that we have to get to the root of. And if instead we think about it like, oh, it's just this way that I think, and I've been in this habit of thinking this way, and there's something I can do about it. And also, it's not a problem. Like, it's not this bad, toxic, evil thing that I have to manage and try and do things with. It's just like, oh yeah, a lot of people, like everyone has a perfectionism handbrake, and mine just comes on really hard when I'm doing new things, or when I'm sure a lot of your audience will resonate with this, when we are doing things that relate to how we're perceived in terms of our intelligence and smart. So career, business, a lot of that really brings up the perfectionism handbrake, and that's okay. And that's human. So when it comes to what perfectionism is, I love Brene Brown, who I'm sure you're familiar with, but
we just did a book club episode on her latest book, Atlas of the Heart, just a few weeks ago. So,
perfect. Yeah. So she talks about, and has really influenced how I think about perfectionism, how I coach on it, my own journey with it, that it's really just the belief that if we can look perfect and do everything perfectly, we can avoid shame, judgment, and blame. And so perfectionism is really this strategy to avoid shame. And so it's less that perfectionists are perfect people. I think that's one of the big misconceptions, that perfectionists are people who actually manage to do things perfectly, when really perfectionism, how it manifests for most perfectionists, is it's about avoiding imperfection. And that leads to things like the all or nothing mindset, overwhelm, procrastination, burnout, fear of judgment. Those are the ways that it often comes up. And most people don't associate those things with perfectionism. They associate someone who's neat and organized and has attention to detail and is a really high achiever. And when it comes to our perfectionism handbrake, it's that we are high achievers despite the perfectionism, not because of it. And it's safe to let go of those perfectionist tendencies. And so they are some of the misconceptions around perfectionism. And for me, my own journey with it is that I really just thought that I had a motivation problem. I never resonated with being a perfectionist. And when I started my business in 2013, I just was getting so in my own way. I was so embarrassed to tell anyone else about my business. I kept it as this big, shameful secret, because it just felt so vulnerable to actually share the real me and to put myself out there. And it meant that I was doing a lot of, like I started as a blog, I was editing things once they were already published and doing that over and over again, and spending hours on creating graphics and like just all these different things that I just thought, and I was blogging about like staying motivated and how can I just stay motivated? And when for me, I realized that it was the perfectionist mindset, and then figured out how to release that handbrake, how to get my perfectionist mindset on my side. That's when I was really able to start getting out of my own way. So a lot of times it really shows up as this problem with motivation. And that's kind of, we're told that really we need to be motivated all the time, and that here are all these tips to stay motivated. And a lot of the conversations around motivation, and not looking at the mindset that might be underlying that.
Okay, there's so much good stuff. I want to pull multiple threads of what you just said.
Yeah,
First of all, can you talk more about this idea of a of a perfectionism handbrake? Because I don't think any of our people have heard that before, but I love that phrase and it makes a lot of sense to me. And I want to hear how you define it and how do people figure out what does that mean for them?
Yeah. So when it comes to the perfectionism handbrake, it's really just, as I mentioned, a way to think about it. So it's not this big problem. It's not this shameful thing. It's just like, oh, I have these times where I put the handbrake on. And I call it that because how we often experience it is we get in our own way and we know what to do and we're just not doing it. And we're self-sabotaging and that kind of thing. So we're still able, like with a car, you're still able to drive the car if the handbrake is on, but you're not getting anywhere faster or better because of the handbrake, but you can still get there. And so when it comes to goals, for example, you can get all the way there with your handbrake on, but you're going to burn out and all of those different things I mentioned when it comes to perfectionism, that if we just think of it like it's a handbrake and sometimes in certain situations it comes on and then I can release it and it's a journey to do that. And also it's not this hard, like impossible thing, but just every day, like we get, when you have your perfectionism handbrake release, that's really when you're in that growth mindset. And when we have it on, we're in the fixed mindset. And so it's like getting closer and closer to being in that growth mindset more often. We can go more into that because it's really key to the conversation around perfectionism. But yeah, it's not this big thing that a lot of the conversation around perfectionism is we need to overcome it. Or I get asked a lot, like, how do you manage it? And I think those questions are a bit misguided, but they make sense because that's how we've been taught about perfectionism. Like, it's in a job interview, you might say, oh yeah, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, when they ask you what your weaknesses are, and like, oh yeah, I'm a bit of a perfectionist. And it's kind of this good thing, but I know I should be saying it's not a good thing. And it's really something that is okay. And also we can learn how to release that perfectionism and be in that growth mindset. So we're more courageous. We don't burn out. We're able to better show up for ourselves, to be more engaged with life. There's so many benefits to it. So that's why I talk about it as being a perfectionism handbrake.
Well, and what I'm hearing when you say that is when you think of it as a handbrake, it's less about I am a perfectionist and I have to overcome this broken thing that is making me a perfectionist. And instead, I just have the brakes on, and perfectionism is the brake in this scenario. And I can release that or hold tighter. Like I have more control over that. And so it feels less like this giant thing you have to tackle, and more of like, oh, it's just a tendency that I can release, but I have some control over that. Feels a little bit less scary, what I'm hearing.
Yeah, 100%. It's about like, we are not the perfectionism. Perfectionism is just a set of thoughts. It's just a way of thinking. And for most perfectionists, like, it's not like we're that way in every area of our life. Or as I mentioned before, when it comes to things that relate to intellectual pursuits, particularly the perfectionists I help, that it tends to be in business and in career and anywhere where, like, if you have been praised for being smart when you were growing up, that when it comes to doing anything related to that it feels very vulnerable to potentially be seen as not being smart. So a lot of the times we withhold effort, we procrastinate, we do things at the last minute, all of these things, so that if we don't do well, we can say, well, I would have done better if I hadn't procrastinated, if I had tried harder, like all of these different things. So we don't have to say, maybe I'm not as smart as I thought I was. Or maybe I'm not, this relates to the shame, maybe I'm not lovable because everyone has loved me because I was like, they thought I was smart. So I don't want to find out I'm not smart. And you were saying, like, your audience, a lot of them are really thinking about their careers. And this can relate to, like, if you want to go after a promotion or a new job, but you think you might not get it, that you'll just convince yourself to stay in the current situation that you're in, because you'd rather do that than be seen to be trying to do something else and not achieve it. So yeah, there's a lot of ways that it can
pull
show
all those
up.
Breaks, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And I know some people are seeing themselves in that. And that's partially why I so wanted you to talk about those misconceptions, because one of the things that I think I was thinking about when it comes to perfectionism is, you think of somebody who does everything. You don't think of procrastination as a perfectionist tendency, because a perfect person wouldn't procrastinate, right? So a real perfectionist, quote unquote, would do what they were supposed to do, and they would do it well, and they would do it on time. And I'm like, well, I procrastinate all the time. So there's no way I could be that much of a perfectionist, but they're actually intertwined in such a huge way that I wanted you to make that distinction. And maybe I actually want to talk a little bit more about this motivation thing, because I hear that all the time. I just need to get motivated. I don't have enough motivation. Like that's what everyone thinks the problem is, but there's something deeper that I'm hearing you talk about here that I want to get into. But anyway, if you procrastinate, that doesn't mean you're not a perfectionist. It actually sounds like it's probably a cue that you are one. And so you might not have identified as that until maybe right now.
Yeah. And I think on that note of procrastination, it would be helpful to talk about some of the ways that we procrastinate, because a lot of times, especially when someone is really ambitious, they view themselves as being smart and that kind of thing, that there might be some scrolling on Instagram, there might be some YouTube videos and that kind of thing. But a lot of what we do is productive procrastination. So procrastinating, procrastinating, procrastinating. That is the flavor we prefer because we don't want to rest, because that feels unproductive. So there's that whole thing going on as well, that we would rather research and learn than actually do, because that then like puts our potential under the spotlight. And for us, like a lot of perfectionists really believe they have so much potential, and we protect our potential by not actually pursuing it. So we can learn a lot of things and like get organized. But when it comes to actually doing the things, that feels so vulnerable that we instead procrastinate. And a lot of times, as I mentioned, that's different flavors of procrastinating.
Oh, okay. You just said perfectionists try to protect their potential because they really believe in their potential. But it sounds like there's this fear that if I really go for it and I don't reach it, that would feel worse than not ever really reaching for it in the first place. So that is really interesting, because there's this belief in self, but this fear at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. And in my own journey, I had like for so many years, I was like, I don't get it, because I really deeply believe in my potential and I have so much self-doubt. And I have those two things at the same time. And how do I reconcile that, and what's going on there? And I think, as I mentioned, like it would be really helpful to talk about the growth mindset and the fixed mindset. And that side of things is a really helpful way to look at it. Like when we're in the growth mindset, which doesn't mean that you love self-development and all of that. And when I first heard about it, I was like, oh, 100% I'm in a growth mindset. Like I love personal development. I'm such a nerd when it comes to that. I definitely have a growth mindset, but it's not actually about how much you like personal development books. It's really about the way that you think about yourself, and yourself, particularly when it comes to your skills and intelligence and talent. So in the growth mindset, we believe that they can be improved with practice. And when we're in the fixed mindset, we believe that they're fixed. And therefore, everything we do is evidence of whether or not we're naturally good enough. And we see effort as a sign of inadequacy when we are in that fixed mindset, which is the way that we're thinking when we're in that perfectionist mindset with the handbrake on. So in the growth mindset, like we all know those sayings about like, it's better to have tried and failed than to have never tried at all. Someone in the growth mindset actually lives by that with their actions. When we're in the fixed mindset, we're like, yeah, I get that failure is part of the journey, but what we live by is I'd rather not try than fail. And it's all coming back to perfectionism being a strategy to avoid shame, and that we are not wanting to risk finding out that we're not as smart and therefore as lovable. We don't have as much potential and therefore we're not as lovable. Like it all comes back to the most universal, commonly experienced human emotion of shame, that we all just want to belong and be loved. And when we are praised, especially heavily in school, we're just praised for the results we get and not how courageous we were or thoughtful we were in the process. We're just praised for, did you get the A or not? And when we're really, applauded for being smart, being a good girl, all of that kind of thing, that we associate like, oh, I'm loved because of that. And so it feels so much better to be doing something smaller that we can be getting the A+ in than attempting something bigger that might end up with us finding out and other people finding out that actually we weren't as naturally talented or intelligent as people thought.
Yeah. Oh, and this is, it's like, it was meant to be good feedback when you were young. Like, you're so smart, or you did such a good job, or I'm so proud of your report card, or what. And it's such a powerful distinction. Like, what are you praising? Are you praising the result, or are you praising the courage, or are you praising the attempt or the stretching of your ability, even if it didn't work out? Because then as kids, we over-identify with what you get praised for. And that makes so much sense to me, because I relate personally. Like, that was what I also got praised for growing up, was you're the smart one, the good at school, got good grades, right? And you're like, well, I don't want to take a subject that I'm not going to get an A in, because then who am I? So
and the schooling system
work here.
Yeah. It really enforces that it's like, I don't know about where you went to school, but it was like, oh, it's better to do a subject that you'll get an A in than to do something where you might not do well, so that you end up with a better overall score. And then you can go to university and do what you want to do. That,
absolutely,
as you said, it really relates to the identity stuff. And now I have a daughter, and it's even with everything I teach, it just still, I have to catch myself saying like, oh, clever girl, and you're so smart, and like good girl, and that kind of thing. And I have to intentionally go like, oh, like, nice job with trying to do, like, being really specific of whatever it was that, and like, great for having a go and all of that kind of thing. And that's how, as adults as well, when it comes to how to release that perfectionism, that's a big part of it, is process praise and praising ourselves for having courage, for really being engaged with what we're doing, particularly, for example, with giving a full effort. So often, and this is procrastination as a way of withholding effort, is that we will half-ass things just so we can protect that potential, and we can blame procrastination instead of having to feel like the finger is pointing at ourselves. So it's really important that we are aware of that, and we are praising ourselves for giving a full effort, even if we didn't get the result we want. Because if we're thinking in the growth-minded way about skills and talents and intelligence being something that we can develop, then the bigger picture is we are developing those skills. But when we're in that fixed mindset, we're thinking, well, that can't change, so I should only do things I'm already good at so that I can look smart and be loved.
Yeah, I think that is you're right. It's such an powerful distinction, the growth mindset or the fixed mindset. To me, it's like, do you believe in nature or nurture, right? Do you believe like we're born with the talents that we have and then that's it and just make the best of it? Or do you believe that you can nurture your talents, or you can learn new things? And I think we all have enough evidence. Like, you've learned enough new things in your life. There's, you're more on the nurture side. That's for sure, if you ask me. But if you don't believe that, you're going to think, well, I don't want to push too hard. I don't want to try too many new things because I'm not innately good at it. And again, pull that handbrake and stop yourself before you can even try something new.
Yeah. And it makes sense we think that way, because if you think about in the media how the most successful people and the most loved people in the world are praised, it's for them, like, oh, they're so naturally talented and gifted when it comes to sports, for example. Like, they're the overnight success. Like, all the praise in the media is around effortlessness and natural ability. Even though that's not the actual story of how they created the success, it's always spun that way. So of course it makes sense that our brain is thinking that we should be having the natural, effortless success as well. And that if we don't, there's something wrong with us. But it's really thinking about how can we be having a conversation with ourselves. It doesn't have to be 24/7, but even just finding little moments throughout the day that we can ask ourselves to do something that feels uncomfortable, that feels scary, that we might not be good at in the beginning, and to do that and to praise ourselves for that, regardless of the outcome of doing that.
Okay. So I feel like we answered this, but I want to make a very clear line, because I know so many people think they just have a motivation problem. And I want to circle back to this motivation thing, because now that we have this context of the growth mindset and the fixed mindset, and the fact that perfectionism is really so much about avoiding shame and about avoiding kind of disappointing yourself and other people.
Yeah.
I want to like, your motivation problem is not a motivation problem. So how would you describe how motivation fits into this whole equation for, that why it's not really about motivation at the end of the day?
Yeah. Well, if I share some of my story, for me, as I said, it manifested as me not taking action. And the way we often think about motivation is motivated people take action. Unmotivated people don't take action. And it's that kind of, you're either this or you're that. And it really, when it comes into like, how does motivation fit into this? I think it comes back to as well, we're talking about the fixed mindset of things wanting to be natural and effortless and seeing effort as a sign of inadequacy. That when we're in that mindset, we only want to do things when we feel like it. We want to feel like everything's easy, that we can naturally be good at it right away, that other people will think it looks good as well. Like we're thinking of things in that way. So of course we don't feel motivated to do things because we're a human. And a lot of the things that will get us to our goals are going to be uncomfortable. And if we're just thinking about like, well, I need to be motivated to do things or I can't do them, and we're thinking of it in that perfectionist way that I have to feel like it in order to be able to do it. And there's a lot of different ways that comes up, like I have to be in flow or inspired, or, people might have different words for that. And it's not about not capitalizing on when you do feel that way. But if you are not recognizing that it's not actually motivation that is the problem, it'll be like me for those first few years when I really was experiencing this motivation problem, that I was doing all of these external things, like changing my work environment and all of that, like buying a new planner and whatever, in order to try and stay motivated, instead of learning how to do uncomfortable things and to have my own back, regardless of how they went.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So this is now, I feel like a question coming up for me and might be coming up from some people listening is they're like, well, okay, maybe I get the motivation thing, but like, why can't I do things consistently? Because I feel like sometimes the motivation is there, and sometimes even when the motivation's not there, you can kind of push yourself to do it. But a lot of the like self-flagellation I hear is people being like, I feel like I could do it really well for a little while, but then I kind of like fall off the wagon, and then it's hard to get back on. And so like, it's not that they can't do it or that they can't find the motivation. It's like, I can't consistently do the things that I know I need to or want to do. So how does that tie in?
Sure. So this is obviously a big topic. And I just wanted to mention that on my podcast and also my program, but on my podcast, The Perfectionism Project, I go into this in a lot of detail and share so many things on this, because that's really what I help perfectionists do, is follow through with their plan. So there's a few things that come into play here in terms of why that happens and then what the solution is. In terms of why it happens, when we think about the perfectionist mindset, and the 5 signs of perfectionism are overwhelm, procrastination, burnout, all or nothing mindset, and fear of judgment. And particularly if we talk about consistency, like they all impact that, but the all or nothing mindset is we'd rather do it perfectly or not at all. And it's especially like if we think about working out, where most people have experienced there being this consistency issue.
Nodding very strongly here, personally.
Is that when you're at the beginning of, say, you're like, okay, I'm going to get fit, I'm going to get healthy. For a lot of people, think about like January 1st, that there's, again, if we go back to this potential, there's all this potential of what things could be like. And especially in those first few weeks, there's not yet an expectation that we have for ourselves that we should be seeing the results. We're like, okay, well, I'm not meant to have abs yet because I've only been going for a week. But especially because of the way a lot of health and fitness, just to use that as an example, is marketed, by about 3 weeks in, we're like, no, I should be starting to see some kind of result by now. 4 weeks in, we're like, no, I really should be seeing some kind of result by now. And if we're not, and particularly when we have our handbrake on, we are very good at dismissing progress. We're thinking very all or nothing about it. We just like want to be all the way there. We think we haven't made any progress at all.
Right. And so not enough progress, right? Like there's always progress, but is it enough?
Exactly.
Right? Uh-huh.
And so it feels very vulnerable to be in the process of getting a result and to be putting a full effort in. And because, as we go back to talking about how we see effort as a sign of inadequacy, that if we're putting effort into something, so whether it's fitness or your career or your business or anything else, if we put effort in and it's not immediately paying off, it feels so uncomfortable. It feels like a personal attack, and like our whole identity is at risk. So it's better to quit. And we're not doing this consciously. We're like, no, I really just want to be able to stick to this. But we subconsciously quit. We either get busy with other things, or like it's often not a dramatic like quitting. We just, oh, I forgot to go today. Oh, I forgot to go today as well. Oh, now I've ruined the week. Oh, now I better wait till next month. Like that kind of thing. Or something in life comes up and we're suddenly like, oh, I had this great idea to do this new project and all of that. So we have to just be onto ourselves with that. But it just feels so vulnerable. Like we're at risk of feeling shame about it if we are seen to be putting a full effort in and it's not actually working. And what I said, that like seen to be is a huge part of it. That if it's like, if other people know that we're trying hard, that feels like, oh, I don't want anyone to know I'm actually trying. I just want to have this like effortless, easy success. And if I can't have that, I'll either like do all the work behind the scenes so no one really knows that I'm trying hard, or more likely we just kind of put the brakes on and stop trying and fall off the wagon. And that's how it looks like this motivation problem, when really it's about being comfortable, being like working at something and having something be a work in progress and not paying off instantly. When we're actually in the growth mindset or more towards that, it's so much easier to do that because we don't feel like our results are actually us as a person. And when we have that disconnect, it's so much easier to be courageous. And part of the way, like if we talk about the solution, there's a whole lot of things I could talk about, but one of the things I teach is clean rest, which is when you're resting without feeling guilty. Very important, because if we take time off, most perfectionists are feeling guilty the whole time about what we should be doing. So the more you do that, the easier it is to actually like have a life beyond productivity. And so when it does come time to be productive, you can show up more courageously because that's not the sum total of your identity.
And which is makes sense for what you were talking about before. It's safer in those moments to say, if I had really tried my hardest, I'm sure I could have done it, but this thing came up, or life got busy, or I just kind of fell off. It's just a consistency thing. I'm just not so consistent, but if I really was, I could get what I want. It feels safer versus I really threw myself out there and then what if it doesn't work out? That's really scary.
Yeah. And I think a really important part of this conversation too is it's about the fear of shame and not the fear of failure. And so we can feel ashamed when we fail. We can also feel ashamed when we succeed. So let's go back to the fitness example. If we actually are consistent, we get the dream body and we still feel the same about ourselves. It feels like we've put all our hopes and dreams on like, well, if I could just be consistent, if I could just wake up early, if I could just get the job, if I could just build the business, then I would feel better about myself. And then we purposely like keep that at a distance. So we never have to actually deal with the discomfort of getting there and realizing that that doesn't automatically solve all of these like inadequacies that we have been experiencing and feeling.
So I want to, this feels like a really good transition into how do we start to release that handbrake? Because I'm already sensing that it's not so much about what do I do differently? Because again, it's not about getting a new planner. It's not about waking up early. It's not about having like the right system. It's got to be first and foremost about either becoming more comfortable with that fear or the potential shame that might emerge, and the fear of what's going to happen if I don't try to grip on too tightly and try to be perfect at everything before you can actually do anything to behave differently. Is that fair?
It's fair. And also at the same time, we need to make sure it's not an intellectual pursuit, and that we can, going back to procrastinating, that we can then be like, okay, well, I need to like have all these thoughts and then I can start showing up differently. And what I actually teach inside my program is that we have so the 3 steps people go through: plan properly as a perfectionist, and then follow through 80% of the time, rest without guilt, and repeat. And through that process, through the doing, you learn how to do all the things we've been talking about in this episode, like how to release that handbrake. So we start by setting a growth goal, which is set above what you believe is possible for yourself. It's not set so far above it. It's in like fairy tale end and you're like, oh yeah, I can totally do that. It's set like just out of reach that you have to release your handbrake a bit in order to achieve it. And then we do a process called power planning. And that really helps you get wise to the procrastination working and procrastination learning and where your time is going. And we focus on following through 80% of the time, because you don't need to never procrastinate in order to achieve your goals. You don't need to, like a lot of perfectionists have tried working from a calendar and just found it to be completely overbearing or tedious, and they fell behind. And that was a whole thing. And so the way I teach it is really that we get our perfectionist mindset on our side through the process we go through when we're planning our week, so that it is easy to follow through, that this whole like lack of motivation and consistency thing, like you can see where it's going on and you can actually do something about it. Clean rest, which I talked about, is something that we put in our calendar, and we do that before we put in the business tasks and like that kind of thing, so that we actually get the rest, because it's like budgeting and saving money. If you save what's left over, there's nothing left to save. Mm-hmm. And the same with rest. We're like, oh, rest once everything's done. Mm-hmm. And the reason everything isn't getting done is because we're not resting. So we put that first. Yeah, we put that first. Mm-hmm. And then that means we have less time than we want to be productive. And it also means it's going to be really uncomfortable to rest, because our brain just wants to be like productive all the time. But it's so important to do that work. So instead of like, yes, we do the mindset work, but we do it through actually taking action and having those beliefs be exposed to us, and then having tools to help with that, rather than just thinking like, because this is the whole reason I love talking about perfectionism, is there's so much around perfectionism of just remember nothing's perfect. Done is better than perfect. Like all these platitudes, and we're like, yeah, I get it. Or like failure is part of success. Like, I think everyone listening to this gets that. Mm-hmm. And yet we still find ourselves perfecting and avoiding. So what do we actually do about that? And having like things you actually go out and do in your real life, like setting that goal and then pursuing it and noticing like, oh, I'm getting my own way here or there, or doing that. And then having the tools to get yourself out of your own way is how to get into the growth mindset, and not just thinking about how to do it and then like, you know, getting the mindset perfect and then showing up perfectly. It's about changing your mindset by practicing it through showing up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Because nobody's going to want to hear this, but you can't overcome fear in your mind. You can't like talk yourself or intellectualize yourself out of feeling afraid. You have to do some scary stuff and realize I was okay and nothing really terrible happened, and like build up your tolerance. I'm thinking of, I think it's a psychology principle, exposure therapy. Like, yeah, that's how we kind of build up our tolerance. Like you have to kind of build up your tolerance. I'm hearing of like not always trying to be perfect. I'm not even saying be perfect, because that's not actually not what this is about. Like, it doesn't seem like this is about being perfect. It's about trying to be perfect out of fear of that you're maybe not perfect. So you have to practice trying not to be perfect and doing some of the hard, messy things in order to work through the mindset. It's not like a sit down and meditate for 3 days in a silent retreat, and now I'm over my fear, and now great, we can go into, you know, taking action to bust through this. No, you're going to have to do action and scary things all along. And I'm like, I know people are like, oh, I hate that. I hate hearing that, but it's the only way.
Yeah. Particularly if your audience are people who love listening to podcasts and like learning all the things and feeling inspired, and like going back to the motivation thing. Oh, just listen to this podcast to get myself motivated for the day or for the week or whatever. That, trust me, I wish the solution was to just listen to more podcast episodes and watch more inspiring YouTube videos and the quotes. I love all the quotes. Like I love all of that. And the way to actually experience change in your life, in how you show up, how you talk to yourself, how you experience your day to day. Like, do you actually enjoy the journey to your goals? All of that comes from setting yourself up in a way that allows you to get your perfectionist mindset on your side. You're not making a lot of mistakes that we make when it comes to planning and that kind of thing. And then you are showing up and doing it. And that means reducing how much you're learning about things. Like we want to be learning by doing. And my program's called Perfectionist Getting Shit Done, because that's what we are doing. We are getting shit done. It's not like perfectionist learning about perfectionism. It's like we are doing things. And through that, we are getting out of our own way and getting into the growth mindset. We're not just thinking about it, because I'm sure like most of my podcast listeners could do this interview on perfectionism, but it's really about committing to doing the work and doing that. And it's not going to feel it's not going to feel comfortable the whole time or any of the time pretty much. And I like to give the analogy of like, if there's cold water, and this is what you were saying before, like you can know the water is going to be cold and you can talk yourself to, do some mindset work on that. When you jump in the water, it's going to be cold.
It doesn't matter how much you mentally prepared.
Exactly. No matter how much you have prepared for that. Like we think, people say like, get comfortable feeling uncomfortable and all of those kind of things. And you're like, awesome. But when you jump in the cold water, it is cold. And being okay with that, instead of thinking like, oh, I knew it was going to be cold, so it shouldn't feel cold. Like that's kind of what we do. Like, oh, I knew it was going to be scary, so I shouldn't have actually physically experienced fear or anything like that. Like it's so helpful, I've found, to just be like, oh yeah, I knew it was going to be like, I was going to feel like I was going to vomit, and here I am. And just because I knew that doesn't mean it's any less true. So that's helped me at least.
Yes. Yeah. There's no getting around. Like sometimes you have to just jump in the cold water.
Yeah.
And I get the sense a lot of perfectionists would either try to just indefinitely talk themselves into why it's going to be okay when I finally jump in the cold water, or just not do it. Just be like, that's too cold.
Yeah. It was like, I'm going to buy the perfect swimmers. I'm going to find the best day of the year to do it. Probably not yet. It's going to be like the first of a month that I'm going to jump in there. Like it's kind of, we spend a lot of time, and this goes back to the productive procrastination, that it's not like, we're like, cool, I'm just going to sit at home and, stare at a wall all day. We're like doing things and getting ready to get ready instead of just jumping in and feeling that. And what you were saying before about safety is so important. It really is about creating emotional safety for ourselves. And the more often you jump in the water and it's cold and you realize like you don't just intellectually understand you're okay in the cold water, you really, from doing that again and again, feel and are able to create safety for yourself, that it is safe in the cold water. That is when we are able to jump in. And that's what it's like, oh, that person's motivated. Like that's how it can look of like, oh, I'm just not motivated to jump in the water. It's really about having that emotional safety. And that's what I teach in my program and on the podcast as well. If people want to listen to that, it's all coming back to that so that we can feel safe doing new things, being bad at things, getting rejected, failing, succeeding. There's a whole thing about success and the shame that might come if we're successful and the people in our lives don't love us as much anymore because we've changed or we're too successful for them or whatever. So it's not just about fear of failure, but yeah, it's incredible work to do. And I'm grateful to be doing it myself. Like I'm in the thick of it too, and helping other people with it. And yeah, just going back to what we were saying at the beginning, it's all okay. Like if you can relate to all of this, like nothing is wrong with you. The fact you can relate to this and we can articulate it in a way that resonates means you are not the only one.
Right. The fact that I thought it was worthwhile to bring Sam onto our podcast to talk about this tells you enough of you are having the same experiences.
Yeah.
That let's just talk about it instead of each feeling bad individually, like we're not doing it right. This is very, very normal. But what I'm hearing is it's not something that's written into who you are. There are ways of creating more of that sense of safety and creating some built-in rest. Some of what I'm hearing is we're probably burning ourselves out too much because we're trying so hard to always be better. So some of these things are practices internally, but also very much external practices that you're going to have to do some uncomfortable things, but we can all get through this together. There's a couple more things that I want to check in with about. First of all, I want to keep going with this idea of this cold water for just a second, because I'm imagining, I'm visual. So I like this idea of like, okay, if we have this like cold pool of water and like working ourselves up to, we have all the perfectionist tendencies that are getting in the way of getting in the water, would you say it's a better approach to slowly work your way into the water, like kind of dipping the toes in and kind of getting comfortable little by little as we go? Is there ever value to just like plugging your nose and jumping in and like just kind of doing it all, kind of a one big fell swoop? What is your take on that in terms of as we're building up this new way of thinking, this new way of being?
Yeah.
Is it a slow, gradual thing? Is it like a, big moment?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of times it's not this big moment. Like it's just these little daily decisions that end up with us in the cold water. And that a lot of times are getting ready to get ready and spending time procrastinating, doing that. Like, as in, that is the form of procrastination, is we're like, oh, I just got to get this lined up and my ducks in a row. Is that we're thinking it has to be like, it's very all or nothing of like, it needs to be this big, like I need to start perfectly so it can go perfectly once I've begun. And we think like the beginning of something has to be perfect. And so when we're thinking about it, like I just have to like feel safe jumping into the deep end of the cold water where it's like no floaties or like what, like just the most extreme version of that, then of course we don't feel motivated to do it. And it's kind of, it's like turning that handbrake on. So what we do when we have our growth goal, which I help perfectionist entrepreneurs, so it's a 12-month revenue goal that we set, but each quarter, so we break it down into quarterly milestones, then we do our power planning each week. So each quarter, every 3 months, we have a goal that increases over the year. So for example, if your goal is to make $100,000, quarter 1 is 10,000, quarter 2 is 20, quarter 3 is 30, quarter 4 is 40. So that overall it adds up to that. But instead of saying, okay, I want to make $100,000, I'm going to divide that by 4 and aim for 25,000 every month. It's building up to that, so that we can work on, like, if we think of it like building a muscle, instead of going into the gym and being like, okay, I need to lift like the heaviest weight. And in the meantime, I'll just watch all these YouTube videos about weightlifting. And then one day I'll walk in there and I'll lift the weight. It's like, let's just start with the light ones. We actually have to do that. We can't think our way. Like, I mean, there is a lot of stuff out there about visualization in your muscles, thinking that's a thing and all of that. But that aside, it's like actually lifting the weight, the lighter one, doing that. Okay, this feels safe. It's a bit uncomfortable. Some stuff's coming up for me. I'm working through that, but this is okay. And then you go for the next one and the next one. So that's how I like to approach things when it comes to this. So we're not in this all or nothing mindset of, I need to make this like grand entrance into my next step in my career or in my life or whatever I'm doing. And if you look at like going back to health and fitness, obviously this is how a lot of people think about fitness. January 1st is like, okay, I'm going to jump in the cold water fully and I'm never going to get out. And this is me. And it's like, actually, it's just those little daily decisions of like, I might go to the gym today, being okay with it. Like following through 80% of the time is what we focus on, instead of it having to be like, I'm either consistent when I'm being perfect or I've fallen off the wagon. And so I better not go at all, because what's the point? It's not going to make a difference. Instead, it's like these smaller decisions that we are making that have us being able to be in the cold water, in the deep end, feeling safe, rather than feeling like it has to be this big event.
Yes. Yeah. And I so wanted you to talk about that a little bit, because I could imagine people being like, okay, I've just got to get up the courage and I've got to prepare my, like, and it doesn't have to feel so scary. I hope this feels like a relief, frankly, is that you can slowly wade your way into a different way of being. And I'm going to go back to your break analogy too. I love a good analogy. If you can't tell, you don't have to just let go of the brakes. And now you were going at like 15 miles 100%. An hour and now you're flying down the highway. No, we can slowly release the brake, so it doesn't feel too scary at any point, but it's just slightly uncomfortable at each new interval. I hope that feels like a relief to people to think about it that way.
Yeah. And it's so good to point that out, because it's like you can release the handbrake right away fully, but you're not going to feel safe doing that, especially when you've told yourself that you are lovable because you're smart and successful. And that was because of your perfectionism, that you're going to be like, well, no, if I let go of this, then everything's going to be sloppy. And there's all these misconceptions around what will happen when you do let go of the perfectionism, that it doesn't feel safe and you have to reprogram your brain and to create like to really get clear on what you're actually doing when you do that and how it is safe to do that. But yeah, if we are just thinking of like, okay, I need to do it all at once, our body and our brain is going to be like, fuck no, not doing that.
I think you're going to just grip on tighter.
Yeah, exactly.
Then you have even more proof that letting go is scary. So it's like, you just kind of, so maybe we're actually saying, not only is it better to wade in I'm going to mix my analogies here, to wade into the pool little by little, but it's actually maybe more dangerous to jump in fully into the pool all at once. Because if it was really cold and really scary, and I don't really know how about that, you might just run back to the side and never jump in again.
Yeah. And it's just like, it's our perception of the safety. Like it is safe to do it, but our brain perceives it as not being safe. And this isn't to say, and I think this is really important, that wading in might feel like a big jump. Mm-hmm. Like there have been things I have done that in hindsight, it was like me wading in a little more and a little more, but it felt like this huge leap. And so it's not about it being, it's either wade in or like, take that big leap of faith. It's like, there's going to be a bit of both. And it's really about getting to know yourself and like being able to have your own back and trust yourself with your decisions, but have your own back regardless of how they go, especially how they go in the short term. We tend to be great at judging things with a very short-term outlook in terms of like, it needs to work instantly. Like go back to talk about the gym. Oh, I'm 4 weeks in and I'm not super fit yet. Okay, well, it hasn't worked when it has worked. So there might be times where you do need to take that leap of faith, even though your legs are trembling. And like for me, going from my career in accounting to quitting that full-time job and going into my business, that was like wading in. Like I wasn't having to then support a family and like all these different things. It was like, actually, I went to a part-time job and I still had all my bills paid from the job. I wasn't even making barely any money in my business. And there was no pressure in that sense, but just the identity side of things. And then I was leaving behind like my law degree, my finance degree, and that whole world and saying, actually, I'm going to do this and I'm going to be seen to do this and be giving this a go fully. That felt like this huge thing to do. And it took so much courage, and courage doesn't feel good. It sounds great, feels shit. So it's really important to remember that when it's like, oh, look at all these people being courageous. That means they didn't feel good when they were doing the thing.
Yeah. No, it's never fun. It sounds like sexy afterward and maybe even beforehand. In it always feels just kind of terrifying. Just know that. Okay. So you've given some really helpful ways people can start to release that perfectionism handbrake. So praising the process instead of even just for yourself, instead of the result.
Yes.
Giving yourself time to, what did you call it? Clean rest. I really like that. Resting without guilt.
Resting without guilt. And knowing with that, I just want to mention, especially because I can bet anyone listening to this who's a perfectionist is like, nah, skip that part. Like you're going to have resistance to it and that's normal and you're not going to want to do it. But really just like adding a little bit more clean rest in your week than you want to. And it just feels so vulnerable because we're like, what do I even like doing besides being productive? And like, it brings up these questions, and it's so much more comfortable to just stay busy working and cleaning and doing whatever we want to do. So the clean rest is really crucial to this. And so I just want to underline that because
I like that one.
We want to skip it. We don't want to rest. I'll rest when everything's done. But as I said, when we're in that mindset, we're not getting everything done because we're not resting. And the rest, not to go on a whole spiel about it, but when we talk about burnout, it's not from lack of rest. It's from working from a place of inadequacy and trying to compensate for that. And that is exhausting regardless. Like that's how it's possible to burn out even when you're not working many hours. If you were spending all this time procrastinating and doubting yourself and beating yourself up, that's the burnout. It's not working a certain number of hours that creates it.
Yeah. Oh, that's huge. I've called that time for my clients before, no expectations time. Like if you can give yourself a no expectations day, oh, that's the best. Yes. But even like an afternoon or an evening, just nothing, like even if you just nap the whole time, that would count because there were no expectations. Like that's just take it all off, take everything off your shoulders for a period of time it's so rejuvenating, and you can actually come back in focused and less burnt out.
And going back to the motivation, that's a huge part of it. Like if someone's having a motivation issue, to look at your clean rest or your no expectations time, probably you're not having a lot of it, but it's really in that time when we are resting and doing it in a clean way that we are actually able to have ideas and to like miss what we're doing. And like all these things that if we're just like, oh, well, I'll rest when I'm done, and we're never done, so we're never resting. Of course, our brain, like it's wired to not want to keep doing the thing. And so of course it's like, no, there's no break coming. So I better just procrastinate because there's no end in sight here. So I'm going to take my own rest and just scroll through Instagram mindlessly because you're not giving it to me. So when you give yourself rest, your desire to rest through different means of procrastinating and doing that will decrease dramatically, because your brain isn't trying to squeeze rest in because you won't give it any rest.
Oh, that is so good. That is so, like, you're going to need to rest at some point anyway. So you might as well give it to yourself and actually get it like deep
in a recharging way. Yeah.
Instead of the way that feels kind of gross afterward. Because you sort of needed it, but you didn't really, there was like that guilt and there was the, mindless kind of numbing activities. Just like cut it off. Give yourself a little break. It's huge. That's huge. Okay. We also know that we have to take some action. We can't just think our way out of perfectionism and out of fear. We have to do some uncomfortable things little by little and feel scared and be messy and build up our resilience. One more piece of this that was coming up, something you said sparked this for me. Maybe it was a safety comment. I wonder if you have found value in working with perfectionists in having them have a safe place with other people. I know some people are safer to be more yourself around or to share new ideas with. And some people, the perfectionism is probably going to get triggered a lot higher when you're around them. So how have you found connections with others to be a valuable way of, or ways to use your relationships to help you build some of that safety?
Yeah, well, this is the reason I have my group coaching program, because when I was doing one-on-one coaching and I was like coaching one client and they were sharing stuff, and then the next one they'd share the same things, and the next, and they all felt alone, and that they didn't have anyone who got it or who knew what it was like and who they could share with and like share their personal development work and all of that kind of thing. And in my program, and this is just to really speak to the power of community and surrounding yourself with people who get it, is that it doesn't actually exacerbate any perfectionist tendencies to be around other people who think that way, because the work that we do in our program is getting out of your own way, and everyone's focused on that and has awareness around their perfectionist tendencies and isn't just complaining of like, oh, that's just the way I am and that kind of thing. It's like, oh, I can see how I'm getting my own way and here's what I'm going to do about it. And, there's a whole other thing about knowing better. Like when we shame ourselves for like, oh, I know what to do and I'm just not doing it and I should know better than that and all of that. So it's so powerful to have examples around you of people who have been in a similar mindset, who are getting out of that mindset. So you can actually see it is possible. It's not just us being like, oh yeah, growth mindset, amazing, resilience, cold water, whatever. And you're like, cool, great for you, but I couldn't do that. To be around other people like you who have really similar goals, who are also doing the same work, and to see like the little ways each week and each day where they get like, they might have made a decision and then previously they beat themselves up for it. And now they're actually just making the next decision and moving on and truly doing that from a place of self-trust and compassion. Like just seeing little examples like that. It's like, oh, this is another example of what it looks like in practice, not to just have the intellectual knowledge around it. When it comes to day-to-day life and like the people you interact with in the real world, it depends what kind of circles you are in. But in my experience, not everyone's into personal development, and me kind of like trying to convert people into being into it isn't effective or enjoyable for anyone involved. So it is really powerful to find communities of people who are, and like, that's why I love podcasts. It's like having that in your ear. And in my program, we have a private podcast. So it's like all the coaching calls and stuff go on that. So it's just so helpful to release that shame. Like just being in a group of people who are also doing the same work is like oh, well, I'm not the only one. Like it's not me that's a problem. If everyone else is going through this as well, then maybe I'm not this like black sheep that should be feeling ashamed about. Like it just kind of releases at least one layer of shame that we have around, I should know better than to be not like doing things and not following through with my plans and whatever, that it's like, actually there are other people going through it and it's okay. And I can figure out how to get out of my own way. I don't have to do that perfectly, but we're all doing this together. Like it really just helps to have someone to turn to who gets it and can help you see as well. Like this is a huge benefit, is that other people get what it actually is to be in that perfectionist mindset. They can point out, and like on coaching calls and that kind of thing, but also in the community, someone can point out like, hey, that's, you're in that all or nothing thinking, and here's an alternative to that. But when we're not around people who get it, they're like, yeah, that sounds like great. Like, yeah, you should either go to the gym every day, or there's not really much. But like it's when we're not around people who get it that they solidify those perfectionist beliefs, because most people do have their perfectionism handbrake on to some degree. That is how we are raised as a society currently. So yeah, all of that to say, it is very, very helpful to have a community to lean on. And even for people listening, if you just have one person in your life who gets it and who you can share this with. We have a lot of people who listen to the podcast and then they share that with their friends and they can talk about it that way. Like it's so helpful to have a common language with someone and to be able to share stuff you're going through without it being like, I don't really know what you're talking about, or that sounds kind of weird that you do that. Like, why would you self-sabotage? Why would you procrastinate? Just do the thing. Or it's helpful to
add
just
shame
on get it.
or say things to make you feel more shame as you're trying to release the shame. Yes. Yes. Even just one person who I feel like it's that's like a safe person to start building the muscles with. And once you have stronger muscles, it's probably easier to not let those types of comments from other people trigger you quite so much anymore. But if you have a safe space, a community like you're talking about, or a coach, or even just that one friend who you guys listen to the same podcast and have a shared language and talk about we're working on this and we're messy works in progress together, and I have a safe space, then it's easier to have that arena to build up this new mindset, this new way of behaving, this new way of perceiving yourself and the world in that space, so you can take it out into the world, which is a little bit scarier. Again, start in a small pool 100%. And then work to a bigger pool.
Yes. Invite other people into the pool with you. That's what we do.
Yes. Bring your friends to the pool.
Yes.
Oh, well, this was so good. There were so many things. I feel like there's so many things that I wanted us to get into, and we got into all of them. But I feel like there's so much more that people are going to want to dive into. So I'm going to send them to Sam's podcast, first of all. Like, please, this is why she has her podcast. She gets into this, every week, I think? It's some different element of perfectionism. Yeah. So if you related to this, trust me, there's a lot more where this came from.
Yes, there's a lot more.
I'm certainly going to send you there. Where else should people go if they want to hear more about this, or if they want to work with you or find you on social media? Where do they go?
Yeah. So the best place is the podcast, the Perfectionism Project. And then Instagram, I'm at Perfectionism Project. And also I send out every day, it's just like 2 or 3 sentences, they're called Perfectionist Power-Ups, but a little reminder or note to help you get out of your own way and do the thing. So especially if you could relate to what we talked about when it comes to motivation, and really help you with that, but actually taking your perfectionist mindset into account and not having it be triggered or like working against you. So you can go to samlaurabrown.com/power to sign up for that. But yeah, that's where people can find me.
Perfect. Okay. We will link to all of that in the show notes, so you don't have to have remembered that. You can go find links to everywhere that Sam just mentioned. So please go hang out in her communities. If you will find a safe space with other perfectionists. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. This was incredibly valuable. I already know we're going to probably have people saying, we want to bring her back and talk about something else. So, so just know, you connect with a lot of people here. Very validating. I appreciate all your wisdom.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Thanks.
Okay. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Love, any comments you want to share. I'm sure I'll post this in a reel or in a, post on Instagram at some point soon. And so comment on that or go follow Sam Laura Brown and just enjoy her wisdom. And we will be back next Friday with a brand new Dear Rachel.
Okay. Well,
that's, happy Memorial Day to those of you who be American and grilling burgers or something.
Eat a hot dog.
Or swimming in the pool. If you're Scarlett, your highest hopes are that you're swimming today.
And if you're anyone's dog, your highest hopes is that you're nowhere near any fireworks. So
that's so true. People be setting off fireworks these days on Memorial Day, and I'm like,
oh yeah,
no.
Now it's not just
for the 4th of July.
Now it's pretty much any holiday that we can make an excuse to set off fireworks and scare all the dogs.
And scare the animals away from their nests and their little dens and abandon their babies. I'm not going to go on a tear about this, but I have issues with fireworks.
I liked them until dogs came into the picture.
You got like an anxious dog.
And then you're like, I hate this. This is just miserable. And I can't soothe the puppies. Because they think the world is
them and enjoy it.
Exactly.
Right? Whatever. Okay. Well, that was supposed to be like a nice sign off, and then it turned into a bitter old rant.
But still enjoy your hot dogs. And your days at the pool.
Okay. We'll see you next week.
Bye.